Armed conflict in Sudan between the military and the paramilitary rapid support forces broke out in April, with fighting concentrated around the capital Khartoum and the Darfur region. Sudan quickly unraveled, and the country has now ground to a halt as fighting rages on. Over 1,000 people have been killed and over 1 million have been displaced. The crisis has potentially disastrous consequences for the region, but according to observers, it was just a matter of when, not if. So this week on the program, we'll look at the efforts being made to stop the conflict in a country in danger of collapse and delve deeper into why Sudan must be saved. I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. While fighting in Sudan has brought the giant African country to its knees. Before we begin our discussion, let's take a look at some key moments in the conflict so far. On the 15th of April, fighting erupted with heavy gunfire and explosions in the capital Khartoum and also in the western region of Darfur. On April the 22nd, some countries rushed to evacuate their nationals from Khartoum as thousands of foreign nationals and Sudanese citizens fled the country. The United States and Saudi Arabia negotiated a 72-hour truce on April the 25th, but it was quickly violated. A series of further truce deals that followed have met the same fate. Thousands of people continued to flee the country, and on April the 26th, aid agencies raised the alarm as the humanitarian crisis caused by the conflict worsens. U.S. and Saudi-backed talks began on May the 6th in Jeddah between the Sudanese army and the RSF envoys as mediators pressed for an end to the conflict. On May the 11th, both sides agreed to allow urgently needed humanitarian aid to reach war-struck areas, committing to ensuring the protection of civilians. But again, the fighting never stopped. A new one-week ceasefire came into force on May the 22nd, but was also repeatedly breached. On the 1st of June, the U.S. and Saudi Arabia announced a suspension of the Sudan peace talks in the Saudi city of Jeddah, citing repeated serious violations of the short-term ceasefire agreement by Sudan's warring parties. Mediation efforts were struck a further blow on June the 15th when the Sudanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs rejected the appointment of Kenyan President William Ruto as head of a quartet formed by IGAD to negotiate a peace deal in Sudan. Well, joining me now to take a closer look at some of the efforts made so far to bring peace to Sudan are from Cairo, Councillor Gamal Rushdi, spokesperson for the Secretary General of the Arab League. In Nairobi, Noor Sheikh, spokesperson for the Executive Secretary of the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD. And with me here in studio, Abdi Wahab Sheikh Abdi Samad, Chairman of the Institute for the Horn of Africa Strategic Studies. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us here on the program. Abdi Wahab, let me start off with you because the latest conflict in Sudan has been ongoing now since April. First of all, I want to get your view on the peace efforts so far and the key milestones that you think are being achieved using these peace efforts.
Beatrice, Sudanese crisis has a huge impact in Red Sea, Horn of Africa, and Sahel region. What we have seen right now is a proxy war. A lot of external actors are involved. That's why it's became difficult to mediate between the two journalists. But so far, so good. There is what they call Riyadh conference between the two journalists. The fact Saudi is trying to mediate between them. And in addition to that, African Union and IGAD member states also are involved, at least to ease the tension between the two journalists. And hopefully it's a little bit of progress, but not much. But the problem is, the problem we have, African Union together with IGAD member states can easily resolve the internal conflict of African society if there is no external actors. But what we have seen is Sudanese issue is quite different because Sudanese conflict involves a lot of external actors. Unless the Arab League, together with African Union and IGAD member state, come together, discuss the issue, have a unified plan to resolve the problems, it's not easy, at least, to ease the tension. The only option is to remove the power, both of them, both Burhan and also the Hamiti, so that at least the international community must get involved in the Sudanese crisis. Otherwise, it will be having a consequences or repercussions the entire Horn of Africa, Red Sea, as well as the Sahel region.
Noor Sheikh, let me get your view here. I mean, the African Union and African states, as Abdi Wasab says, can they resolve this crisis on their own?
Thank you for having me again, Beatrice. Well, there are, as you know, efforts that are being undertaken at the regional level by the Intergovernmental Authority on Development. When this conflict erupted on the 15th of April, the following day, IGAD convened a heads of state summit that was attended by all our heads of states and government, and they deliberated extensively on the situation in Sudan. At the time, Sudan was actually the chair of IGAD, all the policy organs of IGAD. And when I talk about the policy organs, IGAD has 3 policy organs. So what they decided was unprecedented in peacemaking and diplomacy. 3 sitting heads of states was immediately constituted, and that is President Salva Kiir of South Sudan, President Ismail Omar Guelleh of Djibouti, and President William Ruto of Kenya, to remain seized with the matter and for them to be again supported by all the other IGAD heads of states and government. So these 3 presidents were to travel to Khartoum, but unfortunately at the time, because of the intensified fighting, they couldn't. But they engaged both Chairman Burhan and the leader of RSF, Hemeti, and they impressed upon them the necessity to stop the fighting, to allow humanitarian access, to allow foreign nationals to be evacuated. And in that respect, I must say that, you know, IGAD has managed at least to achieve a few of those.
Councillor Rushdie, let me come to you, because the Arab League has held several emergency meetings to discuss the Sudan conflict. What have been the main issues that have been encountered during the Jeddah peace talks on Sudan?
As you know, the Arab League is not directly a part of these peace talks led by Saudi Arabia and the United States, but the Arab League surely has encouraged this diplomatic effort at mediation in the resolution by the Arab Summit, by the previous Arab, the last Arab Summit in Jeddah. Sudan is an important country for the Arab world. The many Arab countries have connections and contacts with both warring parties, Chairman Burhan and the General Hamiti. And so the Arab countries can play a crucial role in facilitating the mediation. In Jeddah, I think with all consideration and appreciation of for the efforts that are being exerted at mediation, I think Jeddah was the most effective, practically effective effort in terms of bringing not a breakthrough in the situation, but at least a lull, a hudna, or a kind of a ceasefire. Of course, not ideal, as we are all following the situation. Of course, it's intermittent. It's not comprehensive. Lots of problems for the civilians in Sudan and in Khartoum. But the problem in those negotiations going on in Jeddah is basically that both parties have a strong conviction that they can achieve a total military victory, or at least gain the upper hand on the ground. This is a stumbling block for the effort going on in Jeddah.
Abdi Wahab, you know, the world had been watching, or rather the region had been watching Sudan teetering on the brink since at least 2019, 2021 during that coup. Why wasn't there any intervention at that time?
It's very unfortunate, you know, when the conflict became too late. You know, it is an African problems for African solution. That, in fact, that spirit must be there. I agree with him, Noor. They attempted at least to mediate between the two journalists. And they failed because the conflict is beyond African perspective. It's beyond African, capability. That's why external actors are so involved in Sudanese crisis, specifically the Gulf states and to some extent, you know, the US and others. So unless they got the green light from those countries, what Africa can do is very limited, very limited. That's why I'm saying what we have seen today in Sudan is a proxy war. Let US and Arab states bring on board, together with Arab League, African Union and IGAD, must come together on one round table so that they can discuss the issue. If they don't do that, Sudan will go into Somalia way, Sudan will go into Yemen way, Sudan will go into the Libyan way, and if Sudan collapsed, then the neighboring states also will follow. Both Horn of Africa region, Red Sea and Sahel regions also affected. It's not an easy thing. It's not the way you think. Things are much deeper than that. So they can easily, you know, stop what they call the killing. They can stop with the hostility between the two journalists. Right. But to have a lasting solution to the problems of the Sudan, it requires all the external actors to be on board so that they can discuss the issue once and for all.
We'll get to that point in a moment, but I want to get your view here, Councillor Rashdi. What do you feel are the sticking issues? Because the Arab League has held several emergency meetings to discuss that conflict. What do you feel are the sticking issues here?
It's a very delicate situation we have in Sudan, because as we are all following, the fighting has been going on in urban areas. The RSF forces have, mingled with the, in many cases, with the civilian population. It's a very difficult street fight with huge humanitarian consequences. The problem in the main sticking issue in such a situation is how to not only to bring about solutions for the civilians and to alleviate the humanitarian suffering that's going on, and it's beyond the imagination. It's also to have a kind of a clear picture about the future of Sudan. The Arab League emphasizes the importance of keeping Sudan as a unified country with its territory, with the territorial integrity and sovereignty. The Arab world has suffered many conflicts in the last decade, where we have different military forces. This situation has led to bloody civil wars. It led in many cases to a complete state collapse.
Right.
So we are, in the Arab League, we are basically for the unity of the military. There needs to be any political solution in the future needs to answer this delicate issue, how to integrate the RSF in the army, in the national army, or else how to disband it.
Right. So very briefly, Noor Sheikh, I want to get your quick brief here. General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan of the Sudan Armed Forces has rejected Kenya's presidency of the IGAD peace mission. What is IGAD's plan to bring both sides to the negotiation table as you seek a solution?
Well, I mean, the expansion of the quartet and the decision to designate Kenya to chair the quartet was a decision of the IGAD assembly, and Sudan was represented at that assembly. But let me say this, Beatrice. The solution that IGAD is proposing is not a Kenyan position, neither is it an IGAD position. IGAD is just playing a facilitating role. What the agenda setters of any mediation will be the Sudanese people themselves, the Sudanese stakeholders. And if you look at the track record of IGAD in mediating similar situations, be it Ethiopia, be it South Sudan, be it Somalia, in all its member states, IGAD just provides the platform, brings the parties together, and it is the parties to chart the way forward. And IGAD will just want to play that role of facilitating. And we've reached out to both General Burhan and General Hemeti, and both of them have no objection to IGAD leading this process. So we are coordinating with all the friends of Sudan.
All right, a very interesting discussion there. We're going to take a short break now, and when we come back, we'll look at what it may take to bring the two sides to the negotiating table. Stay with us. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Still with me, Councillor Gamal Rushdi, Abdi Wahab Sheikh Abdi Samad, and Noor Sheikh. Before the break, we looked at some of the efforts made so far to mediate in the peace in Sudan. Let's now look closer at what it may take to bring the two sides to the negotiating table. Abdi Wahab, you know, what in your view, though, do you find are the main challenges that Sudan is facing in implementing both the ceasefires and the peace agreements?
You know, unless international community put on pressure, both General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and General Hamiti, they have to force them to at least to compromise for the sake of Sudanese people, then that's only option open for international community. Specifically, the Arab nations, specifically point out UAE and Saudi Arabia, they have to force Hamiti to come to the negotiation table, as well as Burhan. African Union together with IGAD, they can only facilitate the meeting, as Noor put it rightly. They just only facilitate the meeting. But it's up to now Sudanese people to decide the future of their own country. But international community, external actors also has a role to push those guys to compromise at least. If they fail to do so, then it's very unfortunate. The only option now international community open for them is to remove both of them from the power and instead conduct a free and fair election within Sudanese people, so the Sudanese people, they can choose their own leaders. That's only option open for the international community if the two generals fail to compromise.
So let's talk that compromise, Dr. Councillor Rushdi. What do you see are the key steps or compromises, as Abdi Wahab has mentioned, the compromises that need to be made to overcome the thorny issues in the Jeddah peace talks, or what the Arab League has seen, and achieve peace in Sudan?
Yes, as I mentioned before, the main sticking issue has to do with the conviction of both parties that they can achieve and they must achieve total victory. So long as both parties have this conviction, it would be extremely difficult to bring the fighting to an end. But at least what can be done now is to de-escalate the conflict, give through the hudnas and the lulls, the ceasefire, no matter how imperfect those lulls are, but all the parties involved in facilitating, in diplomatic activity, in facilitating mediation between the two warring parties need to have their initiatives coordinated. Coordination here coordination in mediation effort is key, because otherwise if we have competing efforts at mediation, the two parties themselves will have an opportunity to play actors against each other, and this will help only to prolong the conflict. The longer this conflict continues, the higher the risk we have other outside parties, outside powers to intervene, that are going to intervene in the conflict to the detriment of the Sudanese people.
There is a lot of interest regionally and internationally on containing the conflict in Sudan. As a member of IGAD, Noor Sheikh, why is it important that Africa should not allow Sudan to collapse?
Well, I mean, it is extremely important. One, Sudan is both a member of IGAD, is a member of the Arab League. Sudan borders almost, I think, 5 or 6 countries. And state collapse, you can see where, there is state fragility and crisis. A country like, for instance, where, in the case of Somalia, and even as far as Libya, you will find that there will be small arms and, weapons crossing the borders, refugees crossing the borders in big numbers, terrorism coming in. So there is a major worry that, a fragility in one country has a spillover effect. And I agree with both Councillor Kamal and Abdul Wahab that Sudan, the stability of Sudan is of utmost importance, not just to the region, but internationally. So that's why you find that, the United Nations is very much engaged. The permanent 5 are engaged in the Sudan situation, the Arab League, the African Union, right. Because if Sudan, God forbid, there is a state collapse, then it will have ripple effects not just in our region, but beyond. And Sudan sits on the Red Sea, which is a very, very important maritime navigation route. But let me say this, Beatrice. IGAD heads of state, when they meet on the 12th, they came up with a plan, and we are working with that plan. And that plan, among the priorities, is to convene these 2 leaders in Addis Ababa, or one of the capitals. Our leaders are talking to them. They have welcomed the IGAD initiative. And so once we achieve that, then we talk about, humanitarian access, but most importantly is the future political dispensation of Sudan. And as IGAD, we've always maintained that any solution has to be led and owned by the people of Sudan themselves.
Abdi Wahab, the role of external actors has been mentioned quite extensively. How has the involvement and the interests of external actors, though, how has that influenced the peace process?
Sudan became another Ukraine of Africa, where so many countries are involved, specifically external actors. They have a lot of conflict of interest among the Sudanese, crisis. Mm-hmm. That's why I'm saying the Arab League, they have their own interest in Sudan. UAE, they have their own interest in Sudan. Sudan, we are the same. African, Union and IGAD also, they are just, containing the conflict of Sudan so that they can be out of hand, because it will affect the entire region as well. Horn of Africa, Red Sea, Sahel region, all those regions it will affect. The question is, how are they going to integrate the RSF into Sudanese army? I disagree with my colleague Noor, because RSF, mainly the fighters, some of them are from neighboring states. They involve conflict in Sudan, in Yemen, they involve conflict in Libya. In fact, for the last couple of years, they have been a machinery for hires. So the only option is they have to dismantle those guys, right, and empower the military. So they force the military to do the transfer of peaceful transfer of power and conduct a free and fair election with the help of external actors. That's the only way Sudan we can save them from the collapse.
All right, unfortunately we've run out of time, but I want to get your very brief final comments, and I'll start off with you, Councillor Rushdie. Looking ahead, what are the key priorities and strategies for Sudan in consolidating peace and fostering long-term stability? What do you see as some additional measures and approaches?
Major priority now and the major focus is to de-escalate the conflict and ameliorate the humanitarian situation. Second, all the relevant parties need to coordinate their views about the future of Sudan as a unified country with a unified military force. I totally agree with with our friend from Nairobi. Yes, we need to have this view about a unified military force, because many Arab countries have suffered in the last decade from different militaries. This is crucial to the future of Sudan as a stable, unified, and sovereign country.
Noor Sheikh, your thoughts?
I agree with Kamal 100% that the stability of Sudan is of utmost importance. When we talk about reintegration of forces, it may sound complex, but our leaders, leaders like President Museveni, who have vast experience in military affairs, say that there are criteria that can be set down, which can be agreed upon and help with the integration of forces. But most importantly, Beatrice, as my colleagues have said, most importantly is for these parties first to come to the negotiating table, set the agenda for peace, and for everyone then rally around that agenda for peace, where that will have to lead to a civilian administration. And we are optimistic that if the parties are serious, that can happen, because Sudan has very good diplomats who are highly experienced. Sudan military is highly professional. Sudanese people are highly patriotic. It is paining each and every Sudanese what is now happening, and this pressure from within Sudan itself and from outside, we are optimistic that it will bear fruits.
All right, Abdi Wahab, you have the final word.
Final word, party short. Sudan must be safe at any cost. We have to save Sudan from collapsing. We don't allow Sudan to go into Somalia way, or Libyan way, or Yemenese way. This is a time African Union, together with eager member states, to act accordingly. Put pressure on international actors who involve the Sudanese conflict. Now or never, now or never. Otherwise, it will affect the entire region. It will affect the neighboring states. It will affect the whole African continent. This is a time African Union, together with IGAD, must be serious about this issue. This issue is a now or never. That's why I am going to advise the IGAD member states to put pressure on the external factors, so that they can bring both genders into the negotiation table and to dismantle the RCF. RCF is a missionaries, guns for hire. They use those external actors in Yemen. They use those guys in Libya, and also now they're destroying the nation. Let the military be unified. Right. Let the military allow to conduct a free and fair election, so that Sudan we can save from the collapse. That's the only option open for the international community.
All right, gentlemen, we'll leave it there for the moment, but thank you for joining us in this discussion. And that's all we have time for on this edition of Talk Africa. A big thank you to our guests, Councillor Gamal Rushdi, spokesperson for the Secretary General of the Arab League; Noor Sheikh, spokesperson for the Executive Secretary of the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD; and Abdi Wahab Sheikh Abdi Samad, Chairman of the Institute for the Horn of Africa Strategic Studies. Remember, you can be a part of this conversation online through our social media handles on Facebook and Twitter. You can also catch the show on our YouTube playlist. Do keep the conversation going and join us again next week for more Talk Africa. From me, Beatrice Marshall in Nairobi. Until next time, bye-bye.